And now we have Dr. Chong Ja Ian, who's Associate Professor from the Political Science Department at the National University of Singapore, telling us more about the implications of China's one country, two systems principle. And Dr. Chong is joining us from Boston. Thanks for being here today, Dr. Chong. Now, first of all, what do you think will come out of Carrie Lam's first dialogue here?
So I think the first dialogue, we're not expecting much. There's a lot of venting of anger, and basically the Lam administration has not committed to anything. So, I think it's just merely symbolic. It's symbolic because she's not come out to meet the public in this way, despite 4 months of protest. This is the first time. But beyond that, I think we'll have to see what comes.
Dr. Chong, when China regained sovereignty over Hong Kong from the British in 1997, it was under an agreement to allow the city to have a higher degree of autonomy for 50 years. It's now just 22 years roughly away, into that 50-year mark. Why does China seem to be sort of moving ahead of schedule, if you like?
So I think China, and in particular this Chinese leadership, they prefer more control rather than less. And the key to the one country, two systems model is that apart from foreign policy and security, external security, Hong Kong is supposed to be able to govern itself. It's supposed to be able to run its own things. That's something that I think the current Chinese leadership in particular, but Chinese leaderships in general are a little bit wary about. They don't quite know how to deal with it, because I think if you go beyond the Sino-British Joint Declaration and look at the basic law, Articles 45 and 68 do promise full universal suffrage for both the selection of the chief executive and the legislative council. And these are sort of key issues that I think Hong Kongers feel have not been met.
Now, given all the discontent in Beijing, in Hong Kong right now, has China actually done enough to tackle the concerns of the Hong Kong people and also restore faith in its one country, two systems principle?
So I think the results in Hong Kong, what we're seeing, speak for themselves. Ultimately, I think Hong Kongers would feel more comfortable if they were able to independently and fully select their chief executive, a chief executive that's able to play a brokerage role between Beijing and Hong Kong, which includes, of course, raising Hong Kong concerns. And also, they would probably feel better if there's a legislative council that passes laws that are more representative of Hong Kong, that rests on a legislative council that is elected by Hong Kong people. Right now, there are 60 seats that are based on functional constituencies, professions, industries, that seem to pander more towards big business interests rather than ordinary Hong Kongers. And there are only 24 seats that are directly elected. So short of these reforms, I feel Hong Kongers feel that they're inadequately represented, and to the degree that Beijing does not accommodate these concerns, tension will grow. I mean, they've grown. What we see today is something that is at the end of a process that really began in 2003 with the Article 23 security legislation. The feeling of lack of representativeness, the feeling of increased Beijing's increased intrusiveness.
Yeah, we're into about week 17 of the protests in Hong Kong, and we have seen some show of troops near Hong Kong from China, but apart from that, they've been largely sort of hands-off in how this has sort of been dealt with. What's Beijing's strategy there?
Yes. So I think the People's Armed Police, not exactly the PLA, were put in Shenzhen as a contingency, and also to signal some willingness to be coercive. But to be sure, any use of force in Hong Kong by Chinese People's Armed Police would be an effective end to the one country, two systems model. The wording and the law may stay the same, but I think no one will have the confidence in the model anymore. And the cost for Beijing is extremely high. Businesses like the one country, two systems model because it gives them rule of law with an independent judiciary that keeps the executive at bay somewhat, and that allows them to have the sorts of very sophisticated financial and legal services that they're able to provide in Hong Kong. So if that one country, two systems model is in effect destroyed, then Beijing would have much less of an ability to use Hong Kong as a conduit. I think $1 trillion have moved in and out of Hong Kong in terms of investment to and from China. So if Hong Kong is destroyed, the cost to the Chinese government is actually quite high. And I think Beijing is cognizant of that.
Well, Dr. Chong, China's 70th anniversary is coming up on 1st October. Do you expect that should mark a change in the way that Beijing will deal with the Hong Kong protests?
Right. So I think right now Beijing is trying to step back more because they don't want to have Hong Kong overshadow the 70th anniversary. Anything in Hong Kong overshadow the 70th anniversary. So they're trying not to be. Trying not to inflame the situation even more. There's speculation that after the celebration, China may try to be harsher. But the question is whether Chinese efforts after the 70th anniversary celebration will further inflame the situation in Hong Kong. I mean, one thing that Hong Kong protesters have is that sort of big cost that they can impose on China. So China has to be careful about how they want to handle the situation. Of course, they have the option to use force. They have the option to go nuclear, so to speak. But that would be very damaging to not just Hong Kong, but also China.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, Dr. Chong. I've been speaking with Chong Ja Ian, who is Associate Professor of Political Science at the National University of Singapore.